Right, so
it looks like we're recording.
We're live. Yeah, we're live. So welcome everyone. We've got quite a few people have joined, so thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Chris Grieco. I'm a second year radiology registrar in Cambridge, and unlike most radiologists, I quite like spending time outside, which is how I got involved with BMS. I'm here today with David Hillebrandt, who many of you may already know, and Dr. Deborah Miller, who I've just met, and I'll hand over to Dave to give more introductions on the Journal Club for this evening.
Right, well, we're looking at some papers on altitude and scoring systems. And the first thing I've got to do as an absolutely 100% confirmed Luddite is to work out how to share my screen with you.
So, Dave, if you go back onto your PowerPoint and if you go save as and save as a PDF, I think that's probably our best way to do it. That's the one thing we've not tried yet.
Hold on. So,
and thank you everyone for bearing with us while we get the slides ready.
So where do I go to save a PDF?
So top left, and it should be yeah, where you would click file save usually.
Yeah.
It instead of
save as,
and yeah, just change the end of the file type from, I think it's PPTX or PPX to PDF, so .pdf.
Right. .pdf. Here we are.
And Deb, if you want to introduce yourself in the meantime.
Absolutely. I'm Deb Miller. I was one of the founding faculty of the Diploma of Mountain Medicine in the UK, and I've been involved in mountain medicine in a number of different capacities. Worked in Parache and IPPG clinics in Nepal, amongst other things and other endeavors. But and a long time user and studier of the Lake Louise School, and thank you, Dave, for choosing some very pragmatic and clinically relevant papers for us to look at today, and I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion about this. I'm going to be mostly monitoring the chat, so feel free to throw questions in there, and I will interrupt Dave and introduce those questions as they come up. So please throw in your questions and input along the way.
Right, Chris, I have got, I mean, I can't seem to change it to a PDF. That's beyond my technical ability.
So what you can do is, when you went to save it, you can go print instead of clicking save. You click print, and instead of sending it to your printer, there should be a drop down to save as PDF. Then it should do it for you.
There's a drop down, and there's nothing about a PDF on there.
Why don't we just?
So we could just talk through them.
No, it's actually. I'm sorry, Chris.
You should be able to share your slides, and I think this isn't like a Zoom. I can't see the participants; they can just see our faces. Is that the way it's set up?
Yeah, and we can invite people to the stage at any point if they want to.
Well, I'm sorry, I've got this prepared. There must be a way of getting this onto this. I mean,
it's okay. I mean, Dave,
what we did earlier, and Dave can just do a full screen share, and then
yeah, if that worked earlier, go for it.
Yeah.
So what do? I've gone on the little box with the arrow going up.
Yeah.
It says share your screen. Yep. So I'm doing that. And at the top of that, it says Microsoft Edge tabs, window, or entire screen. And I've now got something up, but it's not my PowerPoint. I apologize to the audience for this. It's known as a technical fuck up. We had understood it was going to be half an hour to prepare. I mean, I've still got it in front of me.
If you want, Dave, you can just go through and describe, and I can share my screen and get together relevant information to present as we go.
I'm sorry, this has been prepared. It's taken me a couple of days.
Fine.
And I actually rely on the way it's laid out. So
if you go, Dave, if you go to share entire screen, what happens?
I'm doing that.
And then click on the thing that says entire screen. There's like a photo of your screen.
I have.
And then you need to click share.
I have.
And that worked earlier. Is that not working now?
No.
I must say, when I tried to do it, it didn't work for me earlier. So let me just try sharing my screen. Nothing happens.
Well, we'll just have to overrun. Shall we all get back in 15 minutes and we'll work on this?
Well, Dave, can we just, I mean, I don't know. I think we can discuss this with one way or the other. Everyone's here now. They've carved out the time to be here.
Okay, hold on. What if I send it to you with WeTransfer, Chris?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, let's try that. So if I go on to WeTransfer, it is WeTransfer, isn't it?
Yeah. And if the audience want to make themselves a cup of tea or something,
I think so.
Now's a good chance to do that.
Can we? So the only way the audience can comment would be to put something in the chat.
Or we can invite them to the stage. So
would we have to do that individually, or can we just invite everyone?
Yeah, we can invite everyone.
I don't know. I haven't been to any of the journal clubs before, so I don't know how it works best. But it'd be nice to see faces and hear voices. But I'm happy to read things out of the chat.
Let's do that. I'll invite everyone while we're having this.
It's a small enough group that.
So you should get a message coming up on your screen that inviting you to the stage essentially. And if you'd like to, you can either introduce yourself, or you can just keep it on mute or reject the whatever you want. I'm just going through one by one in alphabetical order. So the Zs in the audience, please bear with me. We have our first people are slowly being able to join. Good stuff. And if you've joined a little bit late, just drop a little message in the chat and I will join you. I will invite you to the stage after the Zs.
There
we go, Andy.
Yeah, I'm here.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm here to provide some counselling for Dave.
Thank you, Andy.
That's all right.
You're as much a Luddite as I am.
Well, I know. It's pretty hard work, all of this. I can go in there. There we are. That's me. Come on, Tim. No, you sit down. Come on. You'll learn something. Yeah. Come on. Tim.
Right.
Ah.
For some reason, I can't get that onto WeTransfer quickly. We'll just have to muddle through.
We can do that, yeah. And I can pull up
Okay.
any relevant web pages and stuff as we go.
No, there's nothing technical like that. There was pictures of climbing. Right, if everyone can hear me, I apologise for this clusterfuck. What you would see is a whole load of slides, more about climbing than about reading journals. But you're going to have to imagine those. The first thing I was going to say, if you look at me, I'm not very young. You've already spotted that I'm not very turned on by IT, completely beyond me, and that would have needed half an hour practice, but we didn't get it. I was at medical school pre the internet, so that really dates me. All my knowledge came from books, including one which I'm sad I can't show you, which was by Ambrose Parry in 1649. And I thought that was pretty up to date when I bought it. So it was only the bright people who looked up the references in journals. So I came to this. People somehow think I know a bit about mountain medicine. And sometimes they think I'm sort of academic, but you're all picking up that I'm not. So you've actually got so much on your phones, and some of you will be watching this on phones, that you can look up any journal at any time. But I haven't really got those skills, although maybe I have a little bit. So let's look at acute mountain sickness, and let's look at scoring systems for it. Why did we need scoring systems? Well, we don't clinically. There's a really old-fashioned technique of actually looking at the patient. And if the patient's gone uphill, has got a cracking headache and is looking bloody miserable, there's a 90% chance they've got AMS, which may progress on to other things like pulmonary edema and cerebral edema. But back in the 70s, 1976, Peter Hackett decided it was time to get a scoring system. And he came up with a system that involved examining the patient and talking to the patient. So a very old-fashioned attitude to medicine, but actually a really reliable one, which is still better than anything else we've got. So that was the Hackett system. Then in, when was it? It was in the 60s. No, it was in the 80s. We came up with the environmental statistical, hold on, got to put my glasses back on now, questionnaire. So the patient fills in a questionnaire. Sounds a brilliant idea, doesn't it? Trouble is the 67 questions. If they're capable of filling in 67 questions, I suspect they haven't got AMS, because that cracking headache, which some of you will have experienced, that throbbing, horrible headache, which you want to vomit with, will stop you filling it in. And even that could be subdivided into the environmental statistical questionnaire type C, which is for brain symptoms, and type R for respiratory systems. Anyway, all this clever stuff got us nowhere. And then in 1991, between 91 and 93, clever people at Lake Louise, at the lovely hotel by the lake in Canada, came up with a scoring system that was beautifully simple. Scored things out of 3, anything above, you had to have a headache and you had to have gone uphill recently. And it was a research tool, purely a research tool. It seemed to be the gold standard until the middle of the 2000s, when people began to think, we're not sure this is very accurate. And at a conference in Bolzano in Italy, which is a center of mountain medicine, with the URAC Center, with its amazing pressure chambers that can take you up to over 8,000 meters, can give you a storm, give you high winds, and you can live in it for a week or so. At the conference there, it was realized that actually the measurement of sleep, one of the criteria for the Lake Louise score, really didn't reflect on the actual AMS severity. So that was taken out in a paper in 2018. There have been other scores. If you want to impress people, there's a visual analog score for how you feel. And there's also, in 96, there was a Chinese score, which was translated into English, but no one's ever really been able to use it. Why the Chinese? Well, of course, they're building railways in Tibet, taking people up high quickly. And at international conferences, the Chinese are usually pretty heavily represented. So that's the background of scoring. And then we come on to tonight's main paper. I was going to ask you if I could see you all who's actually read it, but don't be embarrassed if you haven't. This is the one by John Dallymore, and it was published in, hold on, let me have a look. I've got it in front of me. It was published in
2012.
Sorry?
It was in 2012 in Wilderness and
yeah,
Environmental Medicine.
in the Journal of Wilderness and Environmental Medicine. There are really only two journals in the mountain medicine world of repute. There's the Journal of Wilderness and Environmental Medicine, and there's the Journal of High Altitude Medicine and Biology. They're the ones most people read. They're both respected. They're both quite well peer-reviewed. So for those of you who are new to the idea of reading journal articles, it's always worth looking at the reputation of the journal you're looking in. And for any of you who are new to this concept still, all these papers are peer-reviewed by at least two other people with appropriate experience and qualifications, sometimes three, sometimes more. So it's a long, slow process to publication. Those of you who've got publications will know that writing a paper is actually easy. Getting through the peer review process is the long, slow nightmare. So just have that in the back of your mind and don't get cocky when you've just written it. Wait for the next bit. These are, I mean, formal systems, and I think extremely good, sometimes not critical enough. And an editor will often ask for other opinions. If you want to bluff your way in mountain medicine, there's certain ways of doing it. And one of them is to always mutter about peer review at a meeting. It looks good. If you're old like I am, you can peer over the top of your glasses when someone mentions a paper and say, can't remember. I think I may have peer reviewed that one. And that scores you lots and lots of points in the academic circles. The fact you can't remember means you may not have done. Another hint, by the way, for those of you who are new to this academic game, and it is a bit of a game. I'm a GP. I'm not part of the game. At appraisal, no one's ever impressed if I published a paper. That's boring in the GP world. But the other thing to do at a meeting, if you're a bit stuck and when someone are asking questions, you look very knowledgeable and you say, well, I really think looking at it at this level is wrong. We should be looking at this problem from the mitochondrial point of view. It's a great line. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I've used it at several meetings over the years. And as always, I'm off at a tangent, aren't I? We haven't really got to John's paper yet, but I'm hoping you've read it. And what is it in the title that makes it so fascinating? And it's this comment of mounting sickness-like symptoms at low altitude. Now, one thing I always enjoy with this sort of thing is someone who questions dogma. And the late Louise Score by now was very, very accepted for research. And here's some GP in Britain being a cocky bugger and walking 120 something kids over Dartmoor, almost certainly for 10 tours practice. And he's got a reasonably sized sample. They never go above 500 meters. And what do we got? We got a group of adolescents where, and I think it was about 20 or 20 something out of the 100 and something who had positive late Louise scores. That's great. That's a real kick in the teeth. Other things I look for on this paper is the people who've written it. John's actually very respected. He wrote the Oxford textbook of expedition medicine. It's always worth looking when you're looking at a paper, who the authors are, where they're from. It's a lovely, elegant, simple, cheap study. It's got 100% response, which is amazing. But if John turned up at your camp early in the morning and told you to fill the thing in, you filled it in. I bet he sort of bribed them, but he even controlled it to make sure they weren't near pubs and things. So, and again, I was hoping, if there are a lot of people online, can anybody think of other things that might have affected a mixed group of adolescent sleep patterns? Any ideas from the audience?
Well, I was wondering, well, obviously someone could have snuck some substances into their rucksacks. That was always an issue with adolescents. And I was wondering if they would perhaps be up late chatting all night, as adolescents tend to do when they're all together.
See, I think a bit differently from you, Deb. I was wondering if they weren't up all night chatting. They were actually all together all night, which at that age involves a lot of energy output and enthusiasm.
And in the chat, relationships between participants and sleeping in a tent is enough.
Absolutely.
I also wonder how many people they had in tents. I know from my own experience, if I've got 2 people, I usually try to get at least a 3-person tent, if not a 4-person tent. But if you've got 4 people in a 4-person tent or 2 people in a 2-person tent, it's a little bit crowded, especially if you try to put your rucksack in the tent as well.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment, Jonty. Absolutely spot on. I mean, you and I and most of the people on here are fairly used to sleeping in tents. Although as I get older, I need a thicker thermarest. But for youngsters who aren't used to it, on its own, it's enough to cause trouble, just disrupt sleep. And it's interesting, it was on the second night that the figures were higher for that. Any other comments on the disadvantage of this paper, the problems with it?
A great fan
scared.
of one. Hear me?
Yeah.
One sentence in there where it sounds like they're essential to think about symptoms. It said at the start they were all briefed about the objectives of the study, which I think kind of invalidates it a bit because they're all focusing on their symptoms.
I think Yeah, I think you're totally right. There's no blinding at all to this. And they were all told in advance. And if I was a 16-year-old adolescent with a grumpy old outdoor instructor and GP coming to wake me up in the morning when I wanted to have a lie-in, I would certainly have fixed the figures a bit. So I think that's incredibly relevant. Yeah. The other,
how would you have designed it differently?
exactly. I mean, that's the problem. This is a very simple study. And other than how do you blind people to the altitude they're at, you'd start moving into pressure chambers and things like that. And anyway, I still personally, deep down, I still like this paper. And that's because it's hitting dogma. And it's interesting that if we then start to move on to the next paper, what is it, a paper? No, it's not really. It's a group opinion. And this was when the Lake Louise score was revised. And I hope after reading both these, you'll realize that in 2018, we came up with a new Lake Louise score. Has anyone out there had noticed any practical effects, not at a research level, but in terms of communication and clinical data from people in the field going to altitude, that this has affected at all? Fascinating to see who's brave enough to stick their head above the parapet. Are you going to come up with something, Andy? I can see you there. Well, I've certainly come across problems because the Lake Louise score was designed for research. But as is clearly stated in John's paper and in the Lake Louise score revised thing, it's become used by leaders of outdoor trips going to altitude as a measure of potential AMS. And as such, it's been so enshrined that we're now, 5-6 years after the change, and that hasn't got through to the lay public. So I'm getting phone calls from satellite phones from people in the field who are proudly telling me they've scored someone on the Lake Louise score, but don't know which scale they're actually using. So this is without doubt a problem. I now regard them as being two Lake Louise scores. There's the modern one, which is post 2018, which is used for research with no reference to sleep. And there is the older one, which I like to refer to as the Lake Louise well-being score, because well-being is such an important thing in the health service now. And it is actually quite a good measure of how miserable your clients are if you're a leader of a commercial trip, but it may not reflect AMS as such. Of course, there has to be a headache, but it's this sleep component, which, as Jonty said, is enough to upset people, especially those who aren't used to sleeping rough. So I think that's one of the disadvantages. If you look at this document, not really a paper, from some very learned people, I mean, if you look at the front line, you've got all the names in the gods of mountain medicine: Rob Roach, Peter Hackett, Oswald Loltz, Peter Barsh, Andrew Lux. They're all there, and that gives the whole thing an air of authority.
One thing I found interesting, Dave, is that underneath it was the committee members. And I know that those were just people that happened to be at the hypoxia meeting and thought, oh, it'll be interesting. I'll go along to that session. And I know some of them are people who research into hypoxia but aren't involved in mountain medicine at all, or only tangentially. And I see them on the list, and I just sort of have to laugh that it's great that they were involved, but it looks so like all these people agreed to this change, but I'm sure I know some of them had never even heard of the Lake Louise School before.
Yeah, in fact, my name's in that list, and I'm not particularly proud of that. And I think we should have been much better at making it clear that one's a well-being score and one is a research tool. I do think it was right to take sleep out, and I think John Dallimore's paper hints at that, although we've already been able to point out the problems of studying adolescents and preempting them by telling them exactly what you're researching. So
I just find this sort of problematic in terms of this document, is that it's not really a paper, it's not really a journal article. It does have some references, but I spent my entire time reading it, trying to read between the lines and why they chose those particular handful, and just a handful of references to include in this document. I'm also trying to, I know that Jim Millage, who I respect his judgment in most things, mountain medicine, to, if he agrees with something, then he's probably right. I also remember Jean-Paul Richelet, who's one of the other big names in mountain medicine, getting up at a subsequent conference and stamping his feet more or less and saying, I missed one meeting and they go ahead and, write this document without me. And was very much against taking sleep out. And unfortunately, I can't remember what his rationale was for keeping it in, but they make it look like it is a consensus of everyone in mountain medicine, but not everyone did agree with this change. And it was kind of something that was pushed through at one specific conference. And if you were there, you got to give input. And if you weren't, you didn't.
To be fair, it was actually two conferences. It was Bolzano and Lake Louise. And there was quite a lot of email correspondence in the background. But I agree, if you weren't in on it fairly early and aware of it, you couldn't contribute much. So I think there's some very valid points made here. But at the end of the day, I think we have a paper that is much better at defining AMS in terms of clinical likelihood to be acute mountain sickness. You're going to get false positives with it, but less than you would have done if sleep was included.
David, I don't know if anyone can hear me or if I'm on the screen.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm just saying we've always known that it's going to overdiagnose AMS. We know it's very sensitive and not specific. And the number of times when you're at relatively low altitude and you wake up after sleeping in a tent and just feel generally hungover and groggy anyway, we've all experienced that. So in a sense, it's erring on the side of safety, because you're always going to overdiagnose the MS, aren't you? So you're not going to be getting, it's going to be that you're going to be encouraging people to stay or descend or whatever, rather than the other way around. So even if it does overdiagnose, at least it's on the right side of it.
Absolutely right, Paul. And that is stated quite clearly in one of the papers I read recently. But if you're using it for pure research, it would be lovely to have something more cut and dry than that.
It would, but it's like in the research, like Debbie and I have been participating in for many years. It's you're watching a linear change as you follow a defined route for going upwards. So it's not sort of an absolute at that point. It's how it's changed over the time that you've been ascending that you're looking at as well. But I agree that, you know, a lot of these things appear on the scene and then they're adopted, particularly by lay people, like pulse oximeters, for instance. I mean, the societies are awash with those now. During COVID, we were giving them away. You know, I think we got about 1% of them back. But it's not unusual now when a patient phones us up that I get a temperature, a blood pressure reading, and the oxygen saturation is quoted down the phone at me from the patient, which is nice. But it's how you interpret those saturations, isn't it, that's important. And I think it's how you interpret this AMS with the knowledge of its limitations that's the important thing.
Absolutely. And this is pragmatic clinical medicine is what we're talking about if you're looking after a patient on the hill. And there's that lovely picture of Debbie. I think, were you on Everest or something, Deb, or somewhere?
No. Yeah, it was on one of the medics expeditions. It was about 5
it was Macquarie Base Camp.
Was it
Macquarie? Yeah.
Grinning with a great big grin on your face, a nice looking cup of coffee, and a pulse oximeter on your finger, reading sort of upper 70s or something.
No, I think it was actually in the 40s.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew it.
I had just shoveled some snow, and anyway, I think that photo of me is on just about everyone's lecture slides. It's made the rounds, but it's absolutely true. And what guides are looking for is a cut and dry. You know, if you're at this number, you got to turn back, and there's got to be clinical interpretation, which is can be difficult for lay people. They're looking for you know, just very concrete guidance, which you can't do. And I think that this crossover between using it as a clinical diagnostic tool and a research tool is it's good that it's used, but it's also problematic that it's used.
Okay, and I don't know Stephen West. Do I know you, Steve?
We've met once at a conference, but that's about it.
Was I bullshitting as normal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough comment. I can take that. I like you've just put something into the chat saying there is actually a danger in overdiagnosing, because then people may well be, depending on the severity, in a position where they have to descend at night or over difficult terrain. And this in itself can lead to accidents to them and the people helping them down. And absolutely right. So, I mean, as a non-academic clinician, what do you do for a job, Steve?
I'm a paramedic now, 4th year medical student.
Right. Oh gosh, you're one of these bright people who've made the step.
I went mad. Another 5 years seemed like a good idea.
You weren't on the...
It doesn't end when you graduate from medical school. That's the problem, isn't it?
It was thinking very much with my hat of just taking the patient to hospital isn't the benign, safest approach that we all initially think it is, and then you that further.
And as a GP, I spend a lot of time trying not to put people in the back of trucks and taking them up, sending them off to hospital. Dangerous places, hospitals.
When I worked in Parachair, the first thing that Buddha Basanyat taught us was that it's okay to get AMS. It's not okay to die from it. And AMS is part of traveling to altitude, and to be mild AMS is to be expected. And perhaps what we should be focusing on is differentiating mild from severe and from HACE. Yeah,
it's when you step over that line. Where's the line between AMS and HACE? It's, you know.
But that's where these scoring systems are difficult, because you can be looking at a patient, you think, you don't look that bad as a clinician. But if you're a lay person and you're thinking, well, there's something wrong with this guy, and I've got a really bad AMS score because it's over reading, then that, as Stephen says, is going to influence your judgment on what you do next as a lay person. And you might be forcing an evacuation that might otherwise have been deferred or avoided.
Which is, I've got to get some sale pictures, which is why the UK's diplomas in mountain medicine and internationally insist on people having sort of 50% of their skills in mountaineering and 50% or maybe only 40% in medicine, because it's such a complex field and topic.
I think someone's just published a paper, or publishing a paper on this, aren't they, David?
No, it got rejected, Paul.
Did it? Sorry.
But we rewrite it. We
Crap reviewers.
I've got John Dalma. It's a beautiful study, and it was one of those things like, oh, that's such an obvious study to do. Why didn't I think of that? And I think it's a really important addition to the literature. Absolutely simple, and he did pull up some of the limitations of the study, like not looking at other medical conditions or baseline fitness. But if you were, but there was some sort of information that I wished he'd sort of collected, or I would have liked to have known. Does anyone have any other thoughts? If you were going to redo the study, what would you have done differently? What would you have added? What would you have changed?
Well,
I don't think there's much you could have taken out, because it was pretty basics.
Can I come in here again? I'm allowed to, because I'm meant to be directing this. Firstly, I'd just like to say how lovely it is having everybody able to talk, because we're getting feedback from people, and this is what a journal club should be. I was going to show you some slides on various ways of assessing papers following various protocols and formats. And a protocol or a format's like a red rag to a bull to me, and I didn't like them, and I was going to tell you they were all crap. But what we've got here is a group of people discussing things, and this is mountain medicine, and we've got some people who I've known for years discussing this, and we've got medical students throwing comments in, and this is just great. This is the way it should be run. I noticed your comment there, Deb, and what I did was wrote to John Dallymore, because he knows I've always enjoyed his shit-stirring paper, which interestingly was not referred to as one of the references in the Great and the Good's Lake Louise revision paper. But I said, have you done anything else with this data, John? I mean, have you looked at it using both Lake Louise scores? And he pointed out another paper, which I haven't included, but it is on my slides, published in High Altitude Medicine and Biology in 2020. In other words, after the change in the Lake Louise score. And he had to get ethical approval to reanalyze all his data from his Dartmoor study. And this also, I'm sorry I haven't been able to distribute it to people, but I'm happy to make it available as a reference. And basically, from 38 out of 123 people, and I think these figures are right, with AMS, when he took sleep out, it dropped to 10 out of 123. But he had some people with him, one person whose name I don't recognize, who's obviously a bright statistician, who did lots of tests on this and put it through various systems. And they looked at all the criteria, and it looks like fatigue is the next one to go. And when we keep working away at this, we'll eventually end up with a Lake Louise score based most likely only on headache. And there's, I think, Stu's out there, Stu Allen, who's saying, what's wrong with that great GP system of a gut feeling, or you can make it sound a bit posher, but I can't see your comment now.
So I think Stu said, what's better, clinical acumen and the end of the betagram or the Lake Louise score for diagnostic purposes, and more important, clinical outcomes, has it been studied? And I mean, the whole point of these things is to try and make them a little more objective and less subjective. because not everyone's going to have that clinical acumen. And as Dave said in the beginning, there are a number of other things that are, really fabulous, but they're long and or complicated to administer. And the other comment from Jonty was he would ask the participants to complete the questionnaire the week before whilst at home. And that would help, because that would help control for things like, exercise and fluid intake and things like that may not be optimal when you're trekking. And I would probably want to record things like distance traveled and, fluids consumed, maybe while they were traveling, while they were trekking. And then Eleanor commented, "Are adolescents reliable self-reporters? Would it be if somebody asked them the questions and filled the questionnaire out?" And it was it clear in this that were they filling it out on paper, or was John asking them the questions?
They were filling it out on paper. He was delivering the questionnaires to them each day. He was
right.
You see, the other aspect of this, sorry to jump in, is that you're comparing adolescents against most of the research which is in adults. And I've been taking adolescents out for years and years, and things like headaches, feeling sick, tummy ache, I see that at sea level, and I immediately think, oh yes, you're the one that was homesick last time, weren't you? There's a lot of compounding factors with this particular group. So I think, you've got to be cautious in extrapolating the findings, I think.
And so somebody mentioned nausea isn't a common complaint in 13-year-olds, and somebody else jumped in with but feeling sick is. I as a someone who's parented to teenagers, I think feeling sick or nausea was a fairly common complaint until she went off to uni, and I don't have to hear it anymore.
Right. I have no idea what percentage of the audience out there are old and decrepit like me, or have been playing this game for ages, or are new to it. I'd really like to get a feel for that, and get a feel for whether we're pitching this at the right level. But I'm personally enjoying the bouncing back of the discussion. And one of the nicest things about mountain medicine, as I don't want to call it a subspeciality, or it's more of a hobby, isn't it, is that there's not much kudos with it with your peers. It's a bit of a backwater, and it's one of the few times where you can sit in a bar and seriously watch an internationally regarded professor chatting to a student, and chatting to a junior medic, and chatting to a nurse, and chatting to a climbing guide, all on an equal footing, which is really what the BMMS is all about. I have to get a few advertisements in for the BMMS, but I really do feel that.
I'll also put in a plug for some meetings. The ISMM meeting, the Bolzano one, which was a particularly good example, and a really good and fairly practically applicable on the whole. Hypoxia, which is at Lake Louise, I am told, but it isn't actually in their official advertisement, but this is going to be the last hypoxia. It used to be the only mountain medicine focused big meeting. And then it became a lot more academic, and it's also very expensive, which is one of the reasons I stopped going. But I haven't decided, but I am tempted to go this year, it being the last. And I think a lot of some of the big names in the field might be there, because it is going to be the last hypoxia. So it's in February. It's always I think the first full moon or the last full moon in February that they have it, or the full moon in February, I guess it would be. Anyway, the information is on the website. The deadline for abstracts is coming up, and they've always been very, very good. I presented an abstract there, which has actually been quoted in the textbook. Just the abstract was published, and I never got around to writing the article, but that research still has made it out into the great wide world. So if you've got some research that is in need of presentation, that might be a good venue for it.
And just while we're on the topic and discussing interesting research, maybe we could open the floor to everyone to, if you've read something recently that took your interest, that you think might be of either relevance to this or just was an interesting read, then feel free to open that to the floor as well. I don't mind.
Yeah, I'll throw out another comment in that there is work going on in the background for a possible major meeting possibly in the Sheffield area in 2026, which would be British Mountain Medicine Society together with the International Society of Mountain Medicine, most likely last about a week. And we're looking at the finances and everything now. But that would be a great place for short presentations for people if this is just tickling your interest a bit. Going back to my slideshow, which I can't show you, I had a couple of slides which I rather like of solutions to reduce the incidence of altitude sickness. I have always suffered badly with headaches, vomiting, and other unpleasant things when I've gone high. I used to be able to acclimatize eventually and got up some reasonably big peaks. But anyone got any other ideas for how to minimize the problems of AMS, non-pharmaceutical ways of doing it? And anyone willing to shout out some ideas?
Do you want to hear about my acupuncture study?
Yes, go on.
Which made the AMS score spectacularly worse. It was a very small N and a very strange group, so that was. But that was presented at hypoxia in '99. Idea being excused for things like nausea and for headaches. Could it be used prophylactically? But I think that killed the idea completely, really. But it was novel.
Kevin, John in the chat have heard about the use of some breathing techniques. As far as I know, nothing's ever been proven as far as specific breathing techniques. But I'd like to hear more of you.
And thank you, Stuart, for your comment. Stuart, I think you're able to speak, and I've never been at a meeting where you've been and you're able to speak. And you haven't butted in. So what's wrong with you?
Oh, nothing. I've not turned over a new leaf. I'm just relaxing on the sofa. I literally just got in from work when this meeting started, so I'm in post-work relaxation mode. So don't think I've changed it all day. But thanks for the invite.
That's reassuring. Yeah, and your comment about ascending slowly is a good non-drop method is just so correct. And my other solution became, after about 3 or 4 trips to proper high altitude or fairly proper, I swapped to Patagonia. None of the peaks are more than about 7,000 feet above sea level, but the glaciers fall straight into the sea, which is utterly fantastic. There are unclimbed peaks down there. There are multiple unclimbed peaks. It's a fantastic area to go to. The only problem is you obviously don't vomit because of the altitude, but going up the Beagle Channel and up some of the Patagonian fields can be extremely rough. So you get seasick instead of altitude sick and throw up just as much. But and the weather's shit. But it is one of the most fantastic areas of the world. So there are a lot of things one can.
Chris has pulled up a slide of prevention of altitude sickness in the Himalayas, and I've got quite a few issues with that slide. I wonder where he got it from.
Yeah. Can I take issue with the sleeping tablet one? Not completely, because you do know it's a sedative and respiratory depressant, and that does lower your saturations. But a study in 2003 did show that temazepam, at least for the first third of an evening, did abolish sleep apnea, periodic breathing in most of the subjects, which actually overall improved the saturations. So
yeah, I worry about that slide because it's all under prevention.
But they actually talk about treatment. They talk about dexamethasone and nifedipine. And
no,
people don't read, like people will read the abstract of an article. They will read that this is prevention. They'll see the drugs and they might start taking those as prevention. And that's those aren't preventive.
Yeah, no, so I don't know where that came from, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. I blame Trump, but rumor has it was out there before he started influencing people. Is there any
So Chris, where did that slide come from? I can't
Straight off Google Images.
Yeah.
well, Dr. Google's always right, so my patients say.
We could do an interesting. We could ask ChatGPT what it thinks. Shall we ask? Yeah, let's ask AI what it thinks is preventative.
So the meeting that Dave was talking about that might be coming to the UK is the equivalent of the Bolzano meeting. It's the International Society of Mountain Medicine meeting that happens every 2 years. And I've been to at least a couple of them, the one in Bolzano, the one in Nepal. I'm trying to think if there were any others I've been to, but they really are very good and usually much more reasonably priced. But so anyone, let me know if you're planning on going to hypoxia. Might help me make my mind up about that one. But maybe if the skiing was better, I might be more interested too. Anyway, hypoxia February, Lake Louise I'm told by someone on the organizing committee that it is definitely the last hypoxia for the foreseeable future, or ever is what he said. The last.
We're coming round to the hour, and I messed up the beginning. I hope we've covered some useful things. We've had far more people attending this journal club than others, and we've deliberately tried to keep it fairly low key and encourage everyone to chat. I like that idea of just enabling anyone to butt in if they want to. I think it works well. I have got a set of slides which I will try and get to, most likely to Chris, and I don't know if you're there, John. I know you were working tonight. Just so we can let you have them if you want to. I would ask, please, for them.
Yeah, I can make your slides available, David, to only attendees or to members only.
I prefer it only attendees, and there are quite a lot of pictures in there, which I may not have permission to actually show, and some of them are me. They're certainly banned for publication on public sites, because then I can be identified. But
the people that hadn't heard about the journal clubs previously, are they BMMS members? Or it sounds like advertising has gotten better.
Yeah, it has.
I think these the first two journal, well, at least one of them was a very basic science, which I think is important. I think it's important to have a balance, and I think it is still useful to discuss any article. But these pragmatic, more clinical ones, you can kind of make those journal club points and article discussions while actually learning something and adding to your knowledge of plant medicine.
And yeah, as with all of these online things these days, if you'd like a certificate for your attendance, then you need to fill in the feedback, for which I've just dropped a link in the chat, and you'll probably get an email similarly if you'd rather do it a little bit later. But yeah, that can be used as a CPD for your 1 hour of attendance.
And as Stu's pointed out, Dr. AI recommends dexamethasone before ascending. Don't get me started on dexamethasone. It's a bad drug and some badly written papers. Maybe that would be one of our good next Journal Club articles. Is an opportunity.
Sorry, who's recommending Dex before ascending?
AI. The AI interpretation of prevention of altitude illness. So no one.
That's not artificial insurance. That's as thick as shit. I mean, that's unbelievable.
The AI, David, is basically, it just looks across the whole internet and sees what it can control. So that's quite worrying, because that's like a synopsis of what is found on the internet, which tends to suggest that lots of sites must be saying use dexamethasone.
I mean, it's actually frightening when you look at drug use in the mountains. The number of people summiting Everest taking Dex on their summit day is very high. I can't come up with a figure offhand, but it is very high. And basically, you've burnt your get out of jail free card.
And then what happens is AI. Things get repeated. So if one trekking company on Kilimanjaro starts saying something or other, then another trekking company will just reword that and put that on their website. And then so these kind of myths just get amplified, and AI just makes that worse.
Yeah.
So there's
not really AI, it's a probability engine, really.
Right. Well, thank you all for attending. Thanks for those who put questions in. Thanks for those who just butted in. Both are appreciated. And hopefully we'll do this again. I think there is another date, but I'm not sure what the subject will be. And if anyone has a subject they'd like aired, if you volunteer, you don't have to do the whole thing. Some of us are more than happy to help you with it and try and come up with some answers.
Or perhaps if you have a specific article recommendation, you don't necessarily have to lead the discussion. If you've got an article that you think would lend itself well to the Journal Club.
Right. Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for all who helped, and thanks for those who contributed. And we'll do it again sometime. And do feel free to feed back to the BMMS, to John Carr, myself, or anyone else, strengths and weaknesses of the whole project. Thanks. Bye.
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 David? David, can we stay on for a second? Is that permissible?
I don't mind.
Yeah. Just,
Chris, do you want to turn off the
Yeah, I'm just filling out the feedback myself. Give me 20 seconds.
Okay.
I need to do that as well.
I thought it was fantastic though, and actually not having slides in a way made it even more interactive. So
Oh, you should have seen the slides. They were classics. They were a younger, slimmer, fitter me, and one of the mates throwing up with AMS.
Not you sitting on the toilet again at the Dees hut, is it, David?
No, you took that one. No. Paul, I will be